Your Story with Melinda Estabrooks, an exclusive presentation of Faith Strong Today.
Well, welcome to another show on Your Story with Melinda. And today we have a very special and I would say sobering show. My guest has endured incredible traumas in her childhood that led to her being sexually trafficked, not only in Canada, but around the world, which eventually led her into a life of threatening addiction to alcohol, cocaine, and crack. Colleen Allan, my guest, is here to share her story of recovery, her story of hope, her story of finding Jesus, and her story of how she is doing something with her past to make a difference in the lives of young women and men around the world. Colleen, welcome to the show. I'm so glad that you're here with me.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
So, Colleen, thank you also for your bravery. I mean, this is a really incredible story that you have lived so far. So I want to just start off right from the beginning as a young girl, because I think it's important to hear your story and the things that we can learn from you.
Yeah.
So, let's start from the beginning.
Okay.
And I think at 7,
Yes.
some trauma happened, and then how that led down the path of being sexually trafficked.
Yeah. Excuse me. So when I was 7 years old, I was molested by someone who was close to my family. Actually, it was my pediatrician. And and in addition to that, that was right in and around the time when the bullying at school started as well. And when I say bullying, I mean pretty much every kid in the class making fun of me, laughing, making jokes, beating me up, like the whole, whatever you can picture when you think of the word bullying, it happened to me. And those two things, being molested, I think that changed my thinking. I actually suppressed the memory of it for a number of years.
Did you ever tell your parents?
No, never.
And how come?
At the time when I was 7 years old, when it happened, I was innocent. I had no idea that what he was doing was even wrong. I just thought that sometimes doctors do that. And as I said, I suppressed it. And it wasn't until years later when I went into counseling for being trafficked that the memory came back to me. And so that was why I never mentioned it to them. So there was that. And from what I've read, from what I understand, when something like that happens, it changes the way that you look at the world. And even if as a child you don't really understand what's happening, it changes you. It changes the way your brain looks at everything. And so there was that. In addition to that, as I said, I was bullied. So that started in grade 2 and it continued right through to grade 8. So every single day going into school, not knowing if I was going to get beat up, not knowing if I was going to be left out or made fun of. So it was, though all of those things combined, by the time I got into my teens, I had absolutely no self-esteem.
Yeah.
And thought I was ugly, thought I was weird.
So you've taken all this in, you're bullying, they're calling you names, and so you're taking this in as truth.
Exactly.
And essentially lies of what these kids are saying to you.
Exactly. And I was very awkward and didn't dress in the sort of fashionable, flattering clothes, however you want to put it. Wore glasses, so I was a real target. And so when I got to be about 14 years old, things began to change. Didn't need the glasses anymore. Started wearing makeup, started having more control over what I wore. And so as a result, started to attract attention from boys. But in addition to that, I also grew very tall. And it was suggested to me that I might make a good model. And that really, the idea of that really appealed to me because it basically it was my way of saying to those kids that bullied me, see, I'm pretty enough, I'm beautiful enough that I can be a model.
Yeah.
And at that time, I mean, this is in the 80s. So that's when the whole supermodel, so everybody was talking about models and
Yeah, absolutely.
and that whole thing. And so I really latched on to that. And which leads me to how I was brought into the sex trade. When I was 16 years old, there was a man who put an ad in the local newspaper for looking for models for a fashion show that he was holding at a restaurant. And so my dad and I went to meet him. And he felt that I would make a good model, and he also felt that he would be able to help me in my modeling career. At least this is what he was telling my dad and I. And so I did the fashion show with him, and then my dad and I would meet with him over the next few months, and he would make promises about who he was going to connect me with and giving me advice. And he really began to groom both me and my family. He practically became an extended member of the family. He'd come to the house for dinner. So my parents trusted him and liked him. He put a lot of effort into getting them to trust him. And for myself, he really he became more than a business contact. He really became someone that I trusted. I would share things with him about boys. I would go to him for advice. He was like a mentor. All of these things rolled into one. And of course, the low self-esteem that I brought with me from the molestation and from being bullied, I really got attached to people in general. Anyone that would show me positive attention, I was right in there.
Yeah.
And so I got very, very attached to him. And the other thing that really took hold in my heart was this sense of needing to please people no matter what. It didn't matter what they asked me to do. I just wanted to please. And the idea of making somebody mad or letting somebody down, it was just, I wanted no part of it. I was willing to do whatever it took.
And your household, too, wasn't safe. I mean, you had a verbally and emotionally abusive mom,
Exactly.
an alcoholic father.
Yeah.
So, I mean, combined with bullying, molestation,
Yeah.
Colleen,
It's just,
your environment was just, I mean, it's combustible, but it was just, here you are in the midst of it.
Yeah.
And low self-esteem, wanting to please people, it's all there.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
It's almost a sense this predator could see that, eh? Like
Totally.
as we're talking, I want you to get to him, but
Yeah.
I mean, I
Yeah.
can see how it would be sort of like ripe
Yes.
and sort of a perfect scenario to kind of get into this family and groom.
Absolutely.
So go on.
Yeah.
So he's grooming you and your family.
Yeah.
Are you still modeling?
I'm not really,
Not really,
actually.
but
I
just-
did.
okay.
I did that one fashion show for him, and the one thing that he did do is he did connect me with a modeling agency in Toronto. And looking back on it now, it was a red flag of things to come, because initially his promises were it wasn't going to cost us anything. It was going to, he was going to promote me and I was going to have this great career. And when he connected us with this agency in Toronto, it cost my parents a lot of money to get a portfolio and to do all of that. And through them as a student, because I took their modeling course, which again cost money, during that time, I did some volunteer fashion shows. So
Okay,
I didn't get
yeah.
paid, but I did some fashion shows for them. So
Okay,
I
so-
did do some modeling.
So you did some.
Yeah.
So here you are, and
Yeah.
you're going about, your life. He's part of the family, and what happens? How does it all begin?
So it all transforms. Look, when I was, again, I think I was about 17 years old, and I lost my virginity. And I shared it with him. I told him what had happened, and it seemed that was the turning point. Once I told him that, the way he would talk to me started to change. He started to tell me about all of these girls that he worked with in the past who were willing to sleep with men in order to further their careers. And and he made it sound very normal. He made it sound very empowering because these this is their way of taking charge of their career, and they can have power and control over men and using their bodies to further their own agenda, and so he made it all sound very, very normal. And then so that happened over probably a number of weeks, and then one night he had a party at his house, and he invited local dignitaries and business people and whatnot, and that night he drugged me and raped me, and that's where it all shifted. And when I realized what had happened, I literally woke up at the end of the assault. And when I realized what he had done, I broke down and just bawled. And just this sense of shame and betrayal came over me. And it was, you have to understand, I was 17 years old. He was in his 50s. Oh, and so he was a friend, but he was also kind of a father figure. Yeah. So it was just, I felt so disgusted, and I literally said the words like, "This is the last thing that I wanted." And but of course, I've got that whole history of low self-esteem and that neediness and that people pleasing. And so, the question some people might have is, why didn't you leave? Well, I was really, really attached to him at that point. And he would say, he'd say to me, if you trust me, you will do this. And so over the next few weeks, he would continue to have sex with me. Looking back on it, it was just, I think he was breaking me in because he knew that eventually he was going to start setting me up with other men. And at this point, I was still living at home with my parents. I had just graduated from high school in June. And I was going back to school for grade 13 in September. I had plans to pursue writing. I love to write. Mm-hmm. And I had been told that it's important to have sort of a backup plan when you want to become a model because it's not a secure form of employment. And so the plan was that I was going to be at home with my parents, go back for one more semester, do a co-op. But instead, what happened was probably about 2 or 3 weeks into the school year, so about midway through September, towards the end of September, Carl convinced me.
And Carl is the...
He is the perpetrator.
Yeah.
He convinced me and convinced my parents that in order for me to grow up and to further my career, I needed to move into his house. Yeah.
And you did.
And I did. Yeah.
And how, and your parents trusted him enough to
completely trusted him.
Did you ever tell them about what he did to you?
Eventually I did, but not until after it all ended.
So you move in,
yes.
And what begins to happen?
So he almost right away, probably within a week, not even, he starts bringing men to the house for me to sleep with. And in addition to that, I would not be given any money. The money would go directly to him. And in addition to that, he also had me register for, it's called Ontario Works now. I don't remember what it was called back then, but basically it was sign up for welfare. And when I would receive my monthly check, we would get into a cab and go to a bank and cash it, and I would get back into the cab and hand the money over to him.
So, Colleen, let me get this. So you move in with him.
Yeah.
And it sounds like, because some people who are listening, watching, going, but don't you have free will? Couldn't you have just run away or not been with him? He's inviting men over.
Yeah.
So, he essentially is your pimp.
Yeah, exactly.
And you are, being trafficked in a city right outside of Toronto.
Right.
and these men are coming. And what kind of men are these? I mean,
Businessmen.
and
Mainly businessmen. Yeah.
they're coming into his home and having sex with you, paying
Right.
him for your services.
Right.
At this point, you're how old are you now?
I'm 17. Or actually, no, sorry. At that point, I'm 18.
So you're 18 now.
Yeah.
And you're so tied to him, you can't, you don't feel like you can leave, or what's going through your head at this point?
The idea, I was so attached to him, the idea of letting him down, of having to explain why I would be cutting off contact. Like because he said to me, he said, you can't tell your parents what's happening because they will blame you, and they'll look down on you. So
this is what's going through your head. So you're thinking through these things. There's shame, embarrassment. I mean, probably a sense of guilt and like, how do I even tell anybody? Because you're not telling anybody. No friends.
No
family.
No one knows. No one knows.
So this continues. How long does this continue for?
This goes, so it began in September and it went right up until April of 1991. That's right. Because I graduated.
So business people are coming in, you're having sex with them. You're also traveling overseas or internationally to be basically an escort with businessmen.
Right.
And again, it's this thing that, again, for an outsider, it's like, did you ever say, this is wrong, I got to get out? Or was there a point where you're like, this is my life, I have money and security? What's happening in your thinking?
So I went from being ashamed and being and feeling betrayed and just disgusted by all of it, and then all of a sudden it was like something took over and just said, like, this is it. This is your. One of the things that he would say to me is, this is all you're good for, and I started to believe that, and I fooled myself into thinking that that this is a way of having power over my body and having power over men, and again that the idea. The low self-esteem played into that, because all of a sudden I'm tricking myself into thinking I have all this power.
So all this time you're going through this, and my sense is you didn't really know God. You grew up Roman Catholic. You knew that God was sort of out there to be worshipped.
Right.
So you don't know him.
Right.
You go through this.
Yeah.
And it breaks my heart. I honestly believe in these circumstances, God looks and says, oh, his heart breaks.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
I think his heart breaks also for people who might have seen you and seen what was going on and didn't do anything. Or for the men who came and you're the age of their daughter.
Yeah.
Like I'm sorry, I just call it out. Like, wake up, everybody. Like what we're doing as far as when a woman is sexually trafficked.
Yeah.
So let's fast forward. So you're through this.
Yep.
How do you get out? Because I know then you get addicted to alcohol and pot and then cocaine and crack. I mean, your life is just talk to me through how you got out in this recovery of for you.
Yeah. So the addiction started while I was being trafficked, because one of the ways to deal with what was being done to me was drinking. It was a lot easier to do what I was asked to do when I had a few drinks under my belt. And so that really taught me how to rely on alcohol. And Carl passed away. That's how that's how it all came to an end. He was diagnosed with cancer, and within a number of months he died. And as a brief aside, you talk about God's justice. The cancer he had was the most painful cancer, one of the most painful cancers you can have. And like I said, he died, and none of the men knew how to contact me once I moved out of the house and moved back in with my parents. So that's how it all came to an end. That summer, he died in April. That summer, I started the drinking got really, really heavy. By September, up till that point, I had never touched drugs. I had vowed that I was never going to touch drugs, wanted no part of it. But being trafficked changed the way that I looked at myself. I just didn't care. It was like, I've been through all of this. So, this idea of trying to save myself or keep myself safe and not using drugs is stupid.
Yeah.
And so that was the thinking. And so started smoking marijuana and hash. And within a matter of months graduated to using cocaine. And
It's just like numbing, eh? Just
Yeah,
numbing yourself,
totally.
escapism.
Totally.
Dealing with all the dreams and the memories of what went on. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
for men to abuse you and your body, you have to, I think, disassociate yourself and just be like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and wonder,
Yeah.
am I worthless? Who loves
Yeah.
me? Is there a God? I mean, all those things.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Colleen, so you're medicating, you're escaping,
Yeah.
you're numbing,
Yeah.
and so you're taking these, you get addicted.
Yeah.
In all the mess and all of
Yeah.
this, how does God break through? How, and not even that, God was always there. And this is this is the insane thing, because people are like, it doesn't make sense to us, but God's son was always there and knew what was going on. And so many people will be angry at God, why didn't you intervene? But he was there. And how did you and him finally connect through all this?
So in my addiction, God started to put people in my path who believed in God or believed in him. And so I was kind of reminded of the faith of my childhood because I did believe in him.
Yeah.
I really did when I was a child, and reminded me of that. And there was one time in particular that I think back on. There was one night where I was really, I had consumed a lot of cocaine. I was really strung out and feeling of anxiety and panic. And I remember sitting in a bathroom stall asking God to help me, to give me some peace, because I'm so terrified. And in his grace and his mercy, he gave, in that moment, he gave that to me. And it, just that brief little thing showed me that he does hear prayers. And I mean, I forgot about it and continued on and moved into heavier drugs, crack. By the end of my addiction, there was needles, the whole 9 yards. And so basically there's three ways that God really intervened and showed me who he really is. The first one was, the first time was I hit rock bottom. I was on the verge of losing my job, on the verge of being kicked out of my parents' house. And all of a sudden I had this moment of clarity, and I saw how bad my life had become. And something inside of me knew that I wasn't going to be one of those people that could just use drugs and alcohol for years and years and years and not have anything happen. I knew that if I kept going the way I was going, I was going to die. So there was that. And as a result of that, I reached out to my family doctor, and my family doctor referred me to a residential treatment program. And so there was a little bit of a waiting list, about a 6-week-long waiting list to get in. And just prior to me entering into rehab, just before I entered rehab, I had just come off of a 3 or 4 day bender, and I realized that the only way that I was going to be able to overcome this addiction was for God to help me. And so I was in my parents' basement, and something inside of me from way down deep just cried out, "God, help me." And not long after, not long after that, went into rehab, and God started to bring people into my path. In particular, he brought the man that would eventually become my husband.
Amazing.
Yeah. And so a mutual friend introduced us. Glenn had gone through rehab the year before, and he used to come back to the rehab center to go to meetings and that kind of thing. And whenever I got around Glenn, he had this serenity about him. And it was like something that I could reach out and touch. And of course, I had never known that kind of serenity, and I was really drawn into it.
Yeah.
And so I asked him, where do you get that serenity from? And he started to talk to me about his faith. And
his faith in God, and
his faith in God.
relationship with Jesus.
Yeah, because at that point he had been walking with the Lord for about a year.
Yeah.
And God had done an amazing work in his life as well. And so he started to share his faith with me. And this is what leads me to the final thing, and it's just an absolutely miraculous, awesome God moment. I had started praying. I had started going to church. I'd started, growing in my relationship. And then one night, now, just to back up very briefly, during this time, mine and Glenn's friendship had blossomed into a relationship, and we had developed feelings for each other, and our relationship was based on Christ right from the beginning. And so anyway, up to that point, I hadn't told him about being trafficked. I hadn't told him about being abused or anything. And I realized that it was time for me to tell him. And so I told him, and he started to pray over me, and all of a sudden, this incredible peace washed over me.
Wow.
And all of a sudden, it was like a dam broke, and I started crying harder than I had ever cried in my life. And I could hear God naming the traumas, all the different traumas that I'd been through, the bullying, the being trafficked, even some of the things that I had done in my addiction that caused me an incredible amount of shame. And when I came out the other side of that, that was the defining point. From that point,
Colleen, it's like for the first time, you finally had this safe place to share who you are, to be known and fully accepted and fully loved. So, Glenn, your husband, exemplifies that of Jesus, who says, come to me as you are, fully accepting of you and all the yuck that you've done before, and I accept you and love you. And I think that's a beautiful picture of Jesus. And we only have 2 minutes left. And so last thoughts on someone who's had a incredibly traumatic, painful past like yourself. What are your last thoughts on the hope and encouragement for them, whether to find Jesus, to encourage them in their journey?
You know what? For me, it was when God got a hold of me, I felt so dirty. I felt so dirty. I felt so ashamed. And it talks in Isaiah about washing. I will wash you whiter than snow. Your sin may be as red as crimson, but I'm going to wash you as white as snow. And that is exactly what he did for me. He washed me clean, and he just washed the hardness. I mean, like I said, by the time he got a hold of me, I was so angry and hard. The person you see today is nothing like the person that God got a hold of. And so for anyone who is suffering, whether it's abuse, whether it's being trafficked or anything that brings that kind of shame, God can wash it clean and purify, and it's just a whole brand new life.
It is.
Yeah.
I mean, even for myself, there will always be, the memories, and that's your past, right?
Yeah.
So you can't ever not ever remember.
Yeah.
But it's moving past it.
Yep.
In strength, in obedience, and conviction, with courage to say, that's my story, which is really his story.
Yeah.
And thank God we found one another. And I think for you, the choice to change, the choice to recover, the choice to find God, and what an incredible story you have. And now you're a motivational speaker and advocate for those that are sexually trafficked and bullied. Absolutely. Where can we find more information about you? website?
Nothing at the moment.
Okay.
It's basically word of mouth.
Word of mouth.
You know what?
Colleen Allan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. He has blessed me with lots of opportunities to speak.
Okay.
On talk shows and whatnot, and so need to get that going.
We do. We need to get. But Colleen, it was
Yeah.
a privilege to have you here. Thank you for your story and for the inspiration that you bring.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Your Story with Melinda Estabrooks. Listen for new episodes every Monday and subscribe to the podcast at faithstrongtoday.com.